spent the morning together tracking in many ways, or having a little look down the rail tracks at what may be on the horizon with regard to COVID on a personal level. It's time now to look back. It's almost exactly a year. It was a year ago on Monday that Belly Mujinga passed after testing positive for COVID, about 2 weeks after an alleged incident at Victoria Station in which she was allegedly spat at and coughed on while on duty. And if I remember rightly, the report at the time was that she'd been, I think, seeking to enforce COVID restrictions and regulations. A 57-year-old man was interviewed in connection with the incident, but the British Transport Police concluded that there was no evidence to substantiate any criminal offences and closed the case, which left her family feeling understandably let down, I think, or neglected. The idea that there would be no justice for their mum, for their family member, adding insult to the most profound of injuries. The CPS reviewed the evidence, possible lines of inquiry, several months later, but also concluded there was insufficient evidence and no charges were brought. So now a lawyer for the family is refusing to give up on the case, and I'll let him explain more in just a moment. But the idea is that if they can't find out who this man is, then they can't really have much confidence in the conclusions of the British Transport Police or indeed the Crown Prosecution Service. Lawrence Davis is representing the family of Belly Mujinga. He's a leading employment lawyer and the CEO of Equal Justice Solicitors. I hope this doesn't sound like a crass question, Lawrence, but what's the plan? What's the hope here?
It's not a crass question. The hope is that we achieve justice for the family. Presently, we're waiting for the coroner to decide whether an inquest should be granted in respect of Belly's death. And we're also asking the British Transport Police for the name of the assailant who committed the assault on the 21st of March 2020. Can I just add, I've had my COVID jab. I was just listening to what was said earlier, and I think it's a really good idea for everyone to have a jab as soon as they possibly can, and don't delay. So
that's known in the trade as going bi-topical, Lawrence. So well played.
Multitasking.
Indeed. Why are you so keen to get the identity of this 57-year-old man?
Because, it's a family's view, and from the evidence I've seen, that he assaulted Belly. So there is CCTV evidence. I mean, the chronology is quite important. So basically what happened is that in February, Belly made a race complaint against her supervisor at work. That complaint was then ignored by the employer. The same supervisor sent her out onto the concourse on the 21st of March. She wasn't on the road to work outside that day, and the employer knew that she had respiratory problems and shouldn't have been working outside. The employer also had not issued masks to their staff, but interestingly had forbidden their staff to wear masks outside, which was an unusual step. So she went outside, and I've watched the CCTV. I'm one of a few people who have.
Yeah.
So what happens is a large white guy marches quite purposefully towards Belly and colleague Motilani and engages with them. And they say he then said that he had COVID and began to cough while shouting at them and generally losing his temper with them. And they got covered in spittle. He then backed away pointing at them. You can see that on the CCTV. And he joins a queue to get a ticket. And apparently he's buying a ticket for his mum to travel up north. But his anger hadn't subsided. So he doubled back and shouted and coughed at them again, raining spittle over them. So you've got two instances of assault. Okay, so he was then questioned by the employer. Never reported that to the police at any stage, even when the petition hit 2 million. The employer never informed the police, and the police actually received a tip-off, I think, from the union that this had happened. By that time, all the CCTV evidence had been destroyed by Network Rail because Govia hadn't reported it. So anyway, the police interview the white male, and he says he was in a hurry. It was an involuntary coughing episode, right, and he tested negative for COVID. Well, it couldn't have been involuntary because he did it twice. It might have been if he did it once, but you can't double back and do it again. And he didn't cover his mouth on either occasion. And all of us, all decent human beings, if they're having a coughing fit in front of someone, do their best to move their head away and cover their mouth. He did it twice without doing either. And he said he was in a hurry, but you don't double back if you're in a hurry.
And Belly and her colleague both...
Yeah, they both got covered in spittle.
But it said that it had been an assault, a deliberate act.
They complained to management that it had been an assault, and they asked for police to be called. Motolani contracted COVID.
Yes.
She survived. Belly contracted COVID. Sadly, she passed.
So there's two strands here, if I understand you correctly. There is the pursuit of this man and some concern over whether or not his account justifies the conclusions arrived at by the BTP, the British Transport Police, and latterly the CPS. But there's also an employment issue here as well. There's also profound concerns about how she was treated by her employer in general and her specific supervisor in particular, about whom she'd complained in February.
Yeah, it's quite layered and it's quite murky. So Belly died on the 5th of April. On the 8th of April, the employer asked Network Rail for the CCTV to investigate what they called a safety incident. Now, what did they do after that? We don't know. They didn't inform the police. So by the time the police became involved in May, all the original CCTV evidence had been deleted.
So they didn't ask for the footage until she'd passed away?
Yeah, not until the 8th of April. So 3 or 4 days after she passed, they finally began to investigate and requested the CCTV. Where it gets really strange then is when BTP get involved in mid-May, of course, Network Rail claim they've deleted all the original CCTV by then because they say it gets automatically deleted after 30 days, which is one of the problems that we have with the employer taking so long to act on it.
Right.
And not informing the police. So I've seen the CCTV. Now, CCTV, if you watch it, you get 243 frames a second, and you can pull out stills from the frames to get better pictures of people. The CCTV I watched was very grainy. You can't see the guy's mouth. You can see his face. And it's like watching stop motion, like when my 9-year-old son produces stop motion videos. The quality is pretty much similar to that. There's no disrespect.
So there's several cameras. You've obviously seen footage that wasn't destroyed, just in case anybody is confused. But if you could access the stuff that was destroyed, it would be much better quality.
Yeah. Right. So basically, when BTP were instructed, I understand they asked Network Rail for CCTV. They said they didn't have it. Then they asked Govia Thameslink Railway if they had any CCTV, and they produced something. Now, whether they produced the original CCTV or a recording of it, I don't know.
Okay.
But all I can tell you is if you and I had sat around a table and you stood on a table, clapped your hands and sat back down again, if you watch that CCTV, we both appear to be at the table for the duration.
I understand.
Because you get 1 second of footage for every 3 or 4 seconds of real life, which is the exact opposite of CCTV. And when I went to view it at BTP headquarters, the police officer said he wasn't briefed on the facts of the case, but he was briefed on the CCTV. So I said, well, I've got one question. Is this the original CCTV, or is this a recording of the original? And if it's a recording, what happened to the original?
Yeah.
And he said he didn't know. So the only thing he was briefed on, he couldn't tell me.
I guess briefed is a movable
and that's murky,
thing.
Isn't it? Because
to say the least.
Why would they only ask for the CCTV from one camera when they asked for it on the 8th of April? And why is it that the quality of the evidence they gave to BTP was just appalling?
These are obviously questions that I'd be happy to take answers to from any of the organisations involved, the BTP, Govia or Network Rail, who aren't here. I should just point that out. You're the lawyer. You know that I have to. What are you hoping will happen next, Lawrence?
Well, so just to answer your earlier question, which I was trying to get to, in terms of employment, in terms of Govia Thameslink Railway, you've got the fact that the race complaint wasn't investigated, and you've got the fact that they didn't seem to be operating a safe system of work. It can be a criminal offence if you don't operate a safe system of work. So one of the things we've complained about to the IOPC is why didn't BTP look at Govia's handling of the situation, from sending her outside when they knew that she had a respiratory condition without adequate PPE. They were legitimate lines of inquiry. And then I found out that BTP isn't funded by the Home Office. Do you know who funds the BTP?
Well, I'm going to take a guess now that it's Network Rail.
It's a train operating companies, including Govia. So obviously they were conflicted.
Well, you say obviously. I mean, that again is an allegation, isn't it?
If it's hard for a police force to investigate its funder.
Possibly. I mean, these are questions that the more we talk...
A lawyer wouldn't be able to act in those circumstances. A lawyer would have to say...
Because of a perceived conflict of interest, rather than a... That's the word I was looking for. Perceived or possible.
It's a perceived conflict.
Yes. Okay.
And it's not necessarily an actual conflict, but it's a perceived conflict. But
gosh,
when you're looking at such serious things, you have to be very cautious. So it would have been appropriate then for BTP to have asked another police force to step in, which is what police forces do when they have a perceived or actual conflict of interest.
So what are you campaigning for now? What are you... I know that you're seeking the identity of the 57-year-old man, but presumably there are civil as well as criminal proceedings that could follow.
Yeah. So we're hoping for a decision from the coroner on the inquest. We are looking... Motolani, who's a colleague, is suing Govia Thames Link Railway for racism at the tribunal at hearings in October. In terms of a family, they're considering civil actions against Govia and also against the assailant. But until we get the identity of the assailant, we can't go any further. So BTP are refusing to let us have that, and they've given us different explanations over the last 6 months for that. The first explanation they gave was that they didn't want to discourage people coming forward and giving evidence to the police if they feel their name might be made public afterwards. And we said, well, that can't apply in this case, can it? Because the guy who came forward was given a choice between being arrested for on suspicion of murder or attending an interview under caution. So he wasn't volunteering anything. He was just protecting his position. So that doesn't work. So then they started talking about the Data Protection Act. Well, we've got this information, we can't disclose it, but there's an exception to the Data Protection Act that says if a lawyer asks a police force for the name of a suspect so that that suspect may be sued in civil litigation, they have a discretion to release that information to us. And so for the last 6 months, they've been contemplating their discretion or stonewalling us. And so in December, we wrote to say, enough is enough, make a decision. And to date, they still haven't until the day of the vigil, when our complaint to the IOPC was made known. They went on record to give their explanation as to why they hadn't disclosed it.
Finally, Lawrence, I'm out of time, but is there any, and again, I hope this isn't a stupid question, have you come across any proof or otherwise of whether or not this 57-year-old man was COVID positive? The allegation is that he said he was and then subsequently said he wasn't. So is there any evidence there? Were any tests done?
Yeah, well, he said... I mean, this is, again, a bit murky. So he said to the police that on the 25th of March 2020, his employer tested all staff with the antibody test.
Right,
okay?
Yes.
Now, that antibodies test wasn't available to the general public until May. So unless you're in Public Health England, quite a significant government department, or in a position where an employer could obtain that test, which was...
I understand.
Very well connected.
Sure. And so which is possible, but we've got no proof that was the case. We've only got his word for it.
He says that he was tested on the 25th of March, which means his employer is incredibly well connected, which is why we're concerned about BTP not giving us his name.
Oh, I see.
And then on the... Yeah, that's where it's a bit murky.
Oh,
and then, so if he is connected to BTP, they have obviously another problem. But on the 8th of April, the head of testing in the UK, Newman, said... all of the antibody tests are unreliable and they only produce accurate results in severe cases of COVID.
Right.
That was on the record. So anyone tested on the 25th of March, a couple of weeks before that, with that antibody test, could well have had a false negative. So what the BTP should have done in May is tested him, but they just took his word for it.
We'll speak again, I think, I hope. And thank you for your time today. That of course, is a poignant, a tragic anniversary that unfolded on Monday, but the search for justice continues. Lawrence Davis, thank you so much for your time, which has taken us way past the break, but I'm sure you understand why.
Tune into the context with CSI Peter.
On You Learn Naturally Radio.
Language and the use of words is extremely sensitive when it comes to the issue of racism. See, a lot of black people, they get emotional, but racism, as far as I understand, is like the core. It's like the sacred. It's a sacred. It's their juice. You can't mess around with their juice. You understand? We discuss it. You can't put emotional when you're dealing with that subject. It's too highly charged.
Tune into the context with CSI Peter. Tune into the context with CSI Peter.
On You Learn Naturally Radio. On You Learn Naturally Radio.
Tune into the context with CSI Peter.